Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's video is a continuation of my NBA season preview series for the 2019-20 NBA season, and this one covers the Orlando Magic. The Magic finished with a 42-70 record last year and are coming off of their first playoff appearance since all the way back in 2012, and with a lot of good returning young players as well as returning all-star Nikola Vucevic, this team has a lot of hope for not only this season but also the future. But how much of a threat they're going to be this year and over the next few seasons to some of the top teams in the Eastern Conference will really be determined not only by their performance this year, but also on how many of their young players decide to step up and take the next step. But first, let's talk about their offseason, beginning with the additions. And there's really not a ton to talk about in either additions or subtractions for this team in the offseason. Their first round pick is not even going to play this year because of an injury. They're basically going to redshirt him and allow him to rehab from his injury. And then the only other addition is a free agency acquisition, being Al-Farouq Aminu. And this is a player that initially, when the Magic signed him, I liked the move. I felt like it was a good veteran presence. He's a really good 3-and-D guy. It was really important for Portland, and Portland is certainly going to miss him this upcoming season. But once you get to their depth chart, as I'll talk about later, I don't love the move as much specifically for the Magic. But like I said, Aminu should be a nice combo forward, someone that can shoot, someone that can defend, and works really well alongside a lot of the other players that the Magic already have on their roster. Moving on now to subtractions, and really there's nobody worth talking about here. They certainly could have had some subtractions that were very notable this offseason, with Terrence Ross as well as Nikola Vucevic being free agents, but they decided to re-sign both of those guys and really double down on the group that brought them to the playoffs last year. So this is the least eventful offseason review section of any of the previous 23 season previews that I've done up to this point. Moving on now rather quickly to the depth chart for this team, and this is where there can be a lot of discussion about the Magic for this upcoming season. For starters, I have Augustin, Fournier, Isaac Gordon, and Vucevic, and off the bench, Fultz, Ross, Aminu, Bamba, and Birch. And I'll get the first thing out of the way. I'm going to talk about this guy some more later, but I'm not buying into the Markelle Fultz comeback hype thing until I actually see it on the court, until I see it for a sustained period of time and see that he is actually healthy. They put out this weird hype tape thing for him a week and a half ago. His shot release still doesn't look great. It still looks like it's too low. It still looks like he's compensating for whatever upper body shoulder injury that he had. So I'm still putting Augustin as the starting one, with the potential for Fultz to do something this season. In terms of the two spot, Fournier had a really good World Cup and should continue to be a good scoring starting two for this team. But then once you get to the three spot, that's where things begin to get pretty interesting, because they don't really have a ton of natural fits for this position. Ross can be solid there, but I do have him as the backup too, but he could obviously play there. But then once you get to some of the other fits there, being Isaac, Gordon, and then the newly signed Aminu, all of them are more ideally suited in the modern NBA for the four spot, which leaves the depth as well as really the starting position at the three kind of up in the air. I mean, I would put Isaac in there at the three. He's certainly capable of playing the three, as is Aminu, as is Ross. It seems like once again the Magic are front loading their team towards having all of these players in the front court. And that's what I discussed briefly earlier when I talked about Aminu. It seemed like it would make sense now in hindsight, looking at their depth chart, for them to have brought in a player in free agency that was a more natural fit at the three position rather than the four like Aminu is. It's not that none of these guys can play the three, because like I said, Isaac, Gordon, and Aminu can all certainly do that. It would just work better for their individual skill sets to spend more time at the four, and in Isaac's case, maybe even the five as well, which has been something that's been thrown around by Magic coaches and media over the last couple of days and over the last couple of weeks, is playing up. But I don't really have that much of an opportunity to do that because they don't have as much depth at the 2 and 3 spots, which could certainly be an issue for this team. But when you look just overall at the front court depth and talent, this is an extremely talented 3 through 5 group if you're counting those players that I mentioned as threes. You've got Isaac, you've got Gordon, you've got Aminu, you've got Bamba, you've got Vucevic, who was a first-time All-Star last year. All of these guys are going to be really interesting players to watch, and should be, with the exception of Vucevic, all really good defenders. And we'll see kind of how the development of Mo Bamba goes. But this has been kind of a trend for this Magic team over the last couple of seasons, as they've continued to front load their roster with talent without really considering fit that much, which is why you're still seeing DJ Augustin and Evan Fournier starting in the backcourt for a team that is picked so highly over the last couple of seasons So they're really going to need those kinds of players to develop or potentially make a trade for someone or with someone like Aaron Gordon to kind of flatten out their team for them to really have a really good depth and rotation on paper. Moving on now to the players to watch section, and there's really a lot of different players you could put in this section for the Orlando Magic, which is refreshing because the last couple of season previews I've done, there really hasn't been a ton of interesting players to talk about. But the first one for me is definitely going to be Jonathan Isaac. And obviously people are going to be watching Jonathan Isaac. He had a good season last year once he was finally healthy. He's clearly extremely talented, has a ton of physical gifts. You guys know about Jonathan Isaac, but I really just have a few points to make about him. And it's just that if someone on this Magic team is going to like take a leap and be an all-star and maybe make an all-defensive team and be a really good player, obviously Vucevic is already an all-star, but I'm just saying out of all the other players, Bamba, Gordon, Isaac, I think that if you're going to be betting on someone to really break out and be the quote-unquote star of this team, I think Jonathan Isaac is a pretty good bet out of the players that they currently have on their roster. He is just so good on both ends of the floor, still needs to continue to develop as an offensive player, but has such great physical gifts, has so much versatility, can play the 3 all the way through realistically the 5, and I'm just really interested to see how he continues to progress for this team. He has so much upside if he can continue to work on his offensive game, and those are the main reasons that I would mention him as a player to watch for this team. And then the other guy, of course, is going to be Markelle Fultz. And I almost put a video out about this about a week and a half ago when the whole Markelle Fultz hype tape thing came out, because I thought it was just such an egregious example of player mismanagement on the part of the Orlando Magic. Because this is a guy that has clearly had issues dealing with all the mental pressure that comes with being a big-time NBA player, supposedly a number 1 overall pick, all the pressure that comes with that. He clearly struggled with that mentally at times in Philadelphia, then obviously had the shoulder injury and things like that he is still continuing to recover from. So I don't really see why it made sense for them to put out a hype tape and put even more pressure on him than is already on him by most fans, as well as being put on by himself. But in terms of on the court, I wouldn't be surprised if Markelle Fultz actually shows something as an NBA player. He had some flashes on occasion in Philadelphia, but really hasn't played very many games at all. So now that he's had some time to get away from Philadelphia in a new environment, I wouldn't be shocked if Markelle Fultz is a rotation guard for the Orlando Magic this upcoming season. But I'm also not expecting at all, at any point in his career, I've pretty much given up on him being like this all-star caliber, this starting caliber NBA point guard. Like I said, as you see him in the preseason or in this hype tape that they put out, his shot release still looks like he's compensating for some kind of pain, some kind of issue in his shoulder or in his upper body. It still looks like it's too low. And I just, whatever happened to him when he came into the NBA, at this point, I feel like if it was going to be fixed, it would have been fixed by now. And I unfortunately just don't have high hopes for him being able to overcome that, but I still obviously would keep an eye on him, as a lot of people will be, as potentially a rotation piece for this Magic team. But if you're sitting around waiting on this guy to suddenly become an all-star and be this breakout player like everybody's been talking about for the last 2 years, I personally am not on the list or in the group of people that thinks that's actually a realistic possibility. And last up now, expectations and predictions. Expectations, absolutely realistic to expect this Magic team to make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. In terms of predictions, I do have them in the playoffs with about 42 to 45 wins, maybe a few wins more than they finished with last year. And most importantly, I think they're going to be one of the best defensive teams in the East, potentially in the entire league, strictly because of the personnel that they have, specifically in the front court. Backcourt isn't as great defensively, but if you're looking for a team that has a couple of really good wings, 4s and 5s specifically defensively, the Magic are that team. Their coaching staff really focuses on making sure that they are solid defensively, and that's primarily what's going to carry this team into the playoffs, in my opinion. Now, I do still certainly have concerns about their ability to score the ball, even with Vucevic. I do think it's realistic to expect him to potentially have some statistical regression this year and not be as good, maybe not make an all-star team. Again, it could have just been a one-season contract year thing. We've seen things like that throughout NBA history. Wouldn't be surprised if that's the case with Vucevic, which would continue to make it more difficult for this team to score unless guys like Gordon and Isaac and potentially Bamba as well continue to progress on the offensive end of the floor. But defensively, they should be so good that it shouldn't matter, and they should certainly be one of the bottom 3 playoff seeds in the Eastern Conference. But any kind of upside beyond that depends heavily on the development of players like potentially Markelle Fultz or Isaac or Gordon offensively, and just providing a boost to this team in terms of a star standpoint. Like, they certainly have Vucevic, who's an all-star, but I wouldn't say that they have any true NBA stars on this roster. And unless some of those other guys, like I said, like Isaac or Gordon, or maybe even Fultz, if you're one of those people, unless one of those guys develops, this is going to continue to be what things are going to look like for the Orlando Magic over the next couple of seasons, unless they get really lucky with the draft pick or somehow get some kind of big free agency acquisition, which doesn't seem realistic given their cap situation over the next couple of seasons. This is kind of going to be where they're going to be at, and it's going to be really interesting to see if that's going to be enough for this franchise and for this fan base to continue to be a 5 to 8 seed in the East for the next couple of years. Like I said, unless something big happens with some of their current players on the roster. If they're okay with that, then they're going to be a at least semi-relevant team for the next couple of seasons because they have all of these young guys. But if they're not okay with that, then they could potentially try and blow it up and trade someone like Aaron Gordon and try and move up or move back down to get a better, potential higher draft pick. All those different kinds of things are certainly realistic, and there's nothing wrong at all from like an on-court perspective being one of those bottom 4 seeds in the Eastern Conference for the next couple of seasons. But if you really want to compete for championships, then I don't really think this is a roster that's going to be able to do that eventually at any point over the next couple of seasons. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on for this team, but specifically getting back to this year, I have them certainly as a playoff team, one of the best defensive teams in the East or in the league, and 42 to 45 wins, depending on the offensive upside and development of some of their younger players. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.